This videos contain spoilers for the series Jujutsu Kaisen from the first chapter to the latest chapter. Also, a lot of things in the video are only my opinions, so don't take everything said here as fact and make your own by reading the series. Hey guys, I tried a new video this time giving my opinion on Jujutsu Kaisen. Mostly the biggest issue I think the series has that affects a lot of its good potential. Hope you enjoy. Jujutsu Kaisen is a good shonen that has already cemented himself as one of the best ongoing and can be an example for future series. Extremely plot-driven, it has one of the greatest shonen arc of the last decade and a few great characters like Gojo Satoru, Nanami, or Geto. The series has pretty good fight choreography and does most of the tropes of its predecessor very well while also making its own path. Far from being perfect, its power system is pretty decent and opens up the door for plenty of creativity. Overall, I like the series. Now, that being said, my love really decreased a lot from the beginning to now because the series has a lot of issues that are mainly caused by a simple thing: the pacing. I am going to ramble a bit, so if you can follow everything I say, that's great. For a first chapter of a series, it was pretty good. Fast-paced and dense like most first chapters are. But there were already signs of a pacing faster than normal even for a first chapter, and the biggest proof of that is the death of Yuji's grandpa. Usually in a series, if there is a death in the first chapter, it has an impact on the character and he has time to deal with that pain either in that chapter or in the rest of the series. It's an emotional anchor for the character and for the reader too. But in this case, his grandfather's death was too quick and he didn't even have time to process it, that the plot needed to move on. Even the motivation he gained from that lacked a decent amount of impact because of that. The author tried to introduce too much of the lore in that chapter while keeping the conflict, the fight and the emotional bits, which overall ended up not working for the best, and there was more potential waste there already. Then after that, you would assume there is still room to add more upon the motivation and his feeling for his grandfather. But in Chapter 2, the author chooses to resolve too quickly something that would have both explored that relationship and developed Yuji. In the second chapter, the mangaka ends up killing the idea of Yuji's motivation being a curse from his grandfather and the fact that he could end up resenting him. That whole concept ended pretty quickly in a short fight, and just in that short moment the original ideal became Yuji's and ended his grandfather involvement in the story mostly for good. Again, the pacing was way too fast and thus reduced the impact of the whole concept presented there, leaving Yuji's possible development untouched. The concept of Yuji dying at the end of the Cursed Womb arc wasn't the best. On paper it worked fine since we knew he wouldn't stay dead, so him getting up the chapter after looks completely fine, but the mangaka introduced with that death a motivation for Nobara and Megumi that he never explored after. Nobara saying that she didn't know Yuji that much to cry for him makes sense, her ending up still affected also makes sense, but the two of them getting a whole motivation from it, that didn't really end up nowhere since the arc after is Yuji's alone and the next one they reunited. So not only it's not really mentioned that much after since they took his return joke pretty inhumanly well, but Megumi had another motivation already that he ended up using and developing more based on. So the fast pacing made the mangaka introduce things that he never used because of events that he made happen too early on. In the Versus Mahito arc, the fast pacing massively lessened the impact of one of the most important character of the arc, Junpei. Yuji spent a day with him and then at the end of chapter 24, Junpei's mother dies. But directly the next chapter, there is a big skip of not only Junpei's descent to madness, but also him mastering his ability. The only justification used is a page of Mahito explaining. Just one page. So in the end Junpei, which was a good character until then, had all of his potential for the story wasted quickly because of the story and the necessity for the mangaka to have a fight between Mahito and Yuji really quick. Only 2 chapters later, Junpei ends up dead. In the end he served more as plot device than a full-fledged character since most of his arc was skipped and it lessens the overall quality and impact of the arc by a lot. A bit of a wasted potential. In the Gojo's Past arc, my favorite arc in the series and one of the best arc in shonen I believe, there is still a pacing issue right in the middle. The relationship between Kuroi and Riko is shown to be very important and valuable in the arc, so at chapter 69 when the chapter ends with Kuroi captured, it's kind of a big deal. In chapter 70, it takes quite a bit of the chapter to have an argument over saving her with Kuroi, insisting again on how important she is to her, but randomly the whole rescue is skipped. The next page they're at a beach, all together, and only a small panel explains what happened. For such an important plot point that needed a whole argument, and a character that had been relatively important in the arc, it's quite ridiculous to just skip everything and put them on a beach then jump straight to the final confrontations of the arc. It just feels like the mangaka wanted to get to a point quickly, introduced an idea, then ditched it mid-chapter. If I'm being honest, the Shibuya incident happening so soon in the story is proof that the story moves too quickly without breather. The biggest waste caused by that were the reapparition of Toji and the 2 kids that were saved by Geto in the previous arc. Toji only reappeared to end up as a plot device and a deus ex machina and disappear again after. Those 2 kids had little to no purpose being there, they got a little moment with other kids saved by Geto apparently in his adventures, but none of that was ever really explored since they died after serving the sole purpose of bringing Sukuna to the fight. Sukuna being there ended up also being a deus ex machina for Yuji since he healed him and made him capable to fight again. All of that was for the Mahito vs Yuji second fight. So much contrived story because Yuji wasn't strong enough yet to fight 2 special grade curse one after another, and so a waste of character that quickly undermines what happened in the previous arc with Geto. Speaking of thing undermining that arc, the reveal about Geto long being dead just after the previous arc setting him up as possibly one of the greatest antagonists also undermines a lot of that arc. All of the things that ended up being contrived in the arc could have been avoided if there was more time and more arcs before the Shibuya incident. Yuji could have gotten stronger enough to not need that boost, the 2 kids could have been explored more, Geto could have been explored more before being replaced by a villain whose ideology and speeches are so generic overall, and Megumi could have gotten strong enough to not need Toji's deus ex machina. Also chapter 136 might be the worst chapter in the whole series, it had so much info dump and discussion about the grand plan of the new villain who just revealed himself and he basically activated a remote chaos that had no foreshadowing at all. He was able to touch the ground and affect people, cursed objects, everything in the country, all of that with no prior build-up. In his introduction fight, that was way too much. You can see the ideas there but the execution was terrible due to a crazy need of the mangaka to directly jump in another arc without having established things well. In the next arc, the execution of Yuji, the fast pacing ended up hurting the antagonist of the arc, Naoya Zenin. Not only the character didn't have a memorable personality, but he came and went as quickly as the arc, without accomplishing anything or serving any purpose at all. And to make matters worse, the next arc started directly after his defeat, like he didn't really meant nothing for the story, even though the mangaka spent a lot of time on the plot surrounding his character and the Zenin clan leadership. A waste of time and character overall that could have happened later or even before, without making it look so pointless overall. Another thing that the arc could have helped, is make Sukuna's rampage in the Shibuya incident more than a plot device. But the arc was so short that, not only did we barely see the effect of the whole incident on the people, but the execution that was a massive point presented at the end of that arc ended up being short and not memorable at all since we jumped again straight to the arc after. The whole setup of the arc came way too suddenly, way too quickly, with characters that are 1,000 years old appearing even though there was never a mention of such possibilities before outside of Tengen. The speed at which the reach of Kenjaku extended in just a few days and he had the time to communicate the rules to everyone and set up his whole arena barrier. All of that in a few pages and text bubbles of exposition, that really felt too fast and too ridiculous to believe. Exclamation mark. Also, other major fact is Mai's death. While there were plenty of good ideas behind it, the actual execution ended up lacking a lot. Not only did she enter the fight already injured so didn't do much, but we haven't seen her character in more than one panel in a while, and last time we left the interaction the two had with each other didn't felt like they would get to a point like this. It happened too quickly and even the dialogues were too simple and short for such an important moment for Maki. Mai's character, despite her importance in Maki's life and decisions, didn't left an impact on me as a reader. I know I've talked a lot about issues in the series, but as I said before, I like the manga. I also think the series would have hit way higher levels which people are saying it's at right now, even though I don't think it is, if the pacing was slower and there were more breather. Apparently the mangaka plans to end the series in 2 years. That really shows how fast the pacing he is giving the story is, sadly to the detriment of its quality and limiting its ascension to greater heights. It's a series that went from a potential 9 out of 10 to a 6 or 7 at best overall for me. That's it for me guys. Thanks for listening. I'm obviously open for discussion if anyone has something to say about my thoughts, so please feel free to write your own thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and share if you feel like doing so.